Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Ken, but my loyal subscribers can call me K Jizzle. I hope that includes you. Today I'll be talking about why I left Mexico after 12 years of living there, Cancun specifically. It's a long story. There's a lot of factors that went into the decision, and I kind of made it. In the end, I kind of made it rather spontaneously and a little bit unplanned, even though the idea of leaving there was already simmering in my head for a few years before I finally made the decision. One of the primary reasons that I ended up leaving is safety. That has a lot to do with the fact that the cartel's presence can be felt everywhere. Like in general, Cancun is a safe city to visit as a tourist. You may run into certain situations such as police corruption, and there is a certain level of violence, and it's increasingly so from what I've heard in Tulum. There are shootings and these types of things. As a tourist, the odds of coming into contact with that, if you're not like actively putting yourself at risk, they're rather slim. But in general, with safety, I also mean, for instance, starting a business is a little bit of a risky affair in Mexico because you're drawing more attention to yourself. There's such a thing called as what's it called again? Cobranza de piso or something like that, where if you start a business in certain places, and it's fairly common outside of plazas, that you run the risk of either random people or cartel people coming up to you and just asking for protection money. And if you don't pay that, then you wouldn't know if they might come back and torch your business and things like that. So that makes the prospect of doing business, being independent, a risky affair that you always have to keep that in the back of your head. Like, I don't want to, also, even if you're not running a business, just having a certain level of wealth and having people know about that is risky. So if you drive a nice car or things of that nature, or people just, people talk, even if you're keeping things on the down low, is that the right expression? Keeping things rather private. There's always, if you do investments or own properties, there's always going to be people that know, and only one of the wrong people have to know, and you're at risk of being abducted. When I was looking for property to buy near Puerto Cancun, for instance, I was thinking of buying the penthouse in B Towers at some point because I really loved the design of the building, the location, having such a large terrace. But then I heard about one of the former owners having at some point fled Mexico because he was threatened with being abducted. And yeah, it's just everywhere. Like, I've been lucky enough not to have too many instances. Like, I've had cameras stolen. I've seen friends lose their backpack when they were like going out in a club and just, disappeared. And it sometimes seems like they hunt for people that are like a little bit intoxicated to steal their stuff. I was once almost probably abducted, or at least had our stuff stolen, maybe our car as well, when we were doing a road trip in Chiapas. I was with some friends there. I was a drone videographer, a photographer, so we had a bunch of gear, and we were in a decent looking car. It was a large car because there were like a lot of people with a lot of gear, so it was like an SUV of sorts. And we were driving on one of the regular highways. Like, it wasn't perhaps the most popular one, but it was one of the two main highways in that region, if I'm not mistaken. And we were driving through this small town, and when we came out of the town, all of a sudden, my girlfriend at the time was driving, and she slowed down because there's like a bunch of people in the road up ahead, and she thought it was like a market of sorts, so she didn't want to like drive too fast through there. But when we got even closer, they threw some wooden, how do you say, 2x4s with like nails sticking out of them. They just threw that into the middle of the road from both sides. And then we could see they had machetes, and they were holding rocks. They had all kinds of weapons on them. And one of them like knocked on the window. I was in the passenger seat. And I was like, okay, they're probably gonna ask for some money or something, shake us down. So I slightly opened the window to ask what they wanted, and he said, okay, we have to do an inspection. Like, what kind of inspection? He just said, we have to see if there's any liquids in the car. And that, of course, just sounds like they're trying to get into the car so they can rob you of all your things and maybe take the car, or maybe abduct you as well. Who knows? I could already hear them like trying to open the doors from all sides, trying to open the trunk. They were like surrounding the car at this point already. So when I realized that they didn't have good intentions, or even, reasonably bad intentions, I just didn't know what they wanted. So I didn't want to take a risk. And I mean, you're in a risky spot regardless, right? But I didn't see any guns. So I asked my girlfriends to switch places with me. And then I just put the car in reverse. Even though there were people behind us, I could see in the rear view camera, they were like trying to force the trunk open. But I just floored it in reverse because, going to the front with those spike strips wasn't a good option. And these guys started like hitting the car and throwing rocks. One of the rocks was like a giant, like a pretty good sized boulder, and it struck the car right on the pillar between the windshield and the side window. So we're pretty lucky that, a couple centimeters off to one side, and one of the windows might have been busted. But yeah, we managed to make it out of there with just good rush of adrenaline, luckily. And that's when we decided to buy some machetes, just in case we'd be stopped again, that at least we'd have like some form of defense or deterrence. Of course, you hope it doesn't come to that, but we felt pretty, at risk and defenseless in that situation. Because it was like, it's pretty much the half of the village that was like trying to rob us. It makes you realize just how pervasive and dangerous it really is. Another sticky situation that I've been in occurred when I was living next to a caseta. Like, it's a small police, can't really call it office, it's just like a booth almost, with 2 or 3 officers stationed there. And I was living in an apartment building that was 3 stories high right next to it. And in that street, the last few nights, there had often been like dogs making a lot of noise, barking and fighting and stuff like that. And so one night I hear the barking, and then I hear gunshots, and then I hear the dogs panicking, and what's the noise, like something along those lines, when they go off running in panic mode. So my best panic dog imitation, arr, arr, something like that. So I went outside to see what all the commotion was about, and to my surprise, instead of somebody shooting at the dogs, I saw somebody standing with the gun to his own head. And I was like curious, like, what's going on here? Like, I didn't expect him to do anything. For some reason, I didn't think he would actually shoot himself. So I started recording on my phone. I was about, I was on the 3rd story looking down, but it was right outside the building. Like, he was right next to a car, and next to a police car, if I'm not mistaken, or a normal car, I can't recall. And then I noticed that 2 cops were like hiding behind the car, and they were yelling at him, and I overheard that they yelled like, "No, no, Nacho," like tranquilo, like, relax. So they obviously knew who he was, and then he yelled something back, and then all of a sudden like shot himself. And that to me was like, I'd never seen anyone die, let alone by gunshot right in front of me. So that was a pretty impacting moment. And I like got, I ducked down out of instinct, stopped recording. And it turned out that, from what I heard later, because all kinds of police showed up, like the army showed up, 3 or 4 different types of police, the regional, the state, the national, maybe forensics. And from what I heard later on is that this cop committed suicide after he first shot 2 other policemen because he was getting revenge. Apparently, he had been framed or blamed about some kind of drug issue where he was the fall guy apparently, and then went to get even by shooting them and committing suicide. So that's when I decided it's probably not the best idea to live close to the police in Cancun or Mexico in general. An issue that goes hand in hand with safety is corruption. Corruption is unfortunately rampant in Mexico. I've had the good fortune of having to deal with the Mexican legal system, and I can tell you that it's apparently very common for justice not to be served unless you're willing to bribe lawyers or judges or even clerks to get your copies faster. Nothing gets done basically unless you're willing to put money on the table, or better said, under the table. In my particular case, I'll tell you the whole story starting at the beginning. It's a bit of a long story, but I didn't figure this was going to be a short video anyway, so here we go. Feel free to use the chapters in this video. If any of these are too long-winded for you, you can skip ahead to the next one. So the story begins when I got some solar panels installed on my apartment. The company that did it, they somehow got in touch with the people that I invested in the building with. Like, I had purchased that apartment as part of an investor package, and the owners, or the construction company, the owners of that company lived in the same building. They were neighbors of mine, and apparently they somehow got to talking, I believe, or I don't know how else. The owner of the solar panel company, which is called Next Energy, how else they might have been aware of the fact that I had a decent amount of funds that were being returned to me, because when I invested in the building, I got a few apartments as compensation, and I also got just some of the funds returned to me. So I had a chunk of money that I was, it was likely that I was going to reinvest it. And the owner, his name is Ricardo, he told me, look, the energy market in Mexico is being reformed under Peña Nieto. At the time, it was being opened up so that there could be private companies buying and selling power. So it was like an amazing opportunity at the time to start like a solar farm, and they were planning such a project, and he was looking for seed capital investors, and he had these amazing projections for returns. I was like, okay, that's all fine and dandy, but I don't like taking risk in a market that I don't have a lot of experience with. Like, I'm into tech, I know about websites, I know about these kinds of things, like being an entrepreneur in web technology is something that I'm familiar with, but I knew basically nothing about solar panels or solar farms. So I told him the only way that I'm doing this is if I have some kind of guarantee that in case this goes south, that I can get the money back. I want to do a loan rather than an investment, or with the fixed percentage of returns would be my safer option. So I need to have some kind of a warranty. He later returned, and he had this like booklet, and he had this proposal. He had teamed up with one of the notaries in Cancun. The notary had a terrain that was like he had inherited this large terrain, or was in process of inheriting it. They say like herencia en vivo or something like that, from his grandparents. And this was a 400-hectare terrain, not too far from Tulum, although it's a little bit into the jungle. It was supposedly worth about 200 million pesos or something. That was a multitude, like vastly more than I was going to invest. And that was also where the panels would be installed, since there was a way to get the connection with CFE, the energy company. They were going to place the solar farm on that terrain, and the terrain itself would be used, it would be mortgaged, so that in case anything goes wrong, it can be sold off, perhaps, a fraction of what it's worth would be enough to cover my investment. I was like, okay, that sounds pretty interesting, because he was promising, after all, a return of about, I think it was 50% interest over 18 months was for the loan part, and then that could be converted into an investment that would generate maybe like, I think it was between 30 and 50% annually or something like that, which of course sounded very appetizing. Now, fast forward to when the solar farm was supposed to be finished. There were all kinds of issues. They had switched the terrain because he had found a more interesting one that was a lot closer to like a punto de interconexión, like one of those CFE substations or something, so that it would be a lot less costly to put the panels there and to get the connection. So he mentioned all these issues. Also, there were like stories about corrupt politicians wanting bribes and blocking the project because they were vouching for some other projects that would be competing, and all of these things. And he showed documents, and he had stories, and he had, we were doing regular update meetings, so it seemed like he was committed to still making this thing happen. And we started doing some like LOIs, letters of intent, to make adjustments to the contract so that they would have more time. I would have more time to make the decision, because the idea was that I would only have to make the decision regarding whether or not I would want to turn the loan into an investment. That would only take place when there was something to see, so that I would be more assured that something would actually be built. Unfortunately, several, COVID happened, and there was all kinds of other delays. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, it's been way too long now. There hasn't been any visible progress anywhere. I was also seeing like these other red flags about them potentially having similar projects with other issues. The terrain where they were going to put the panels, the owner had also gotten into a conflict with them, or something. I don't remember all of the details exactly, but there were some red flags. I was like, okay, I need the money back. They were like, all of the money has been spent on studies, soil examinations and studies and permits and maybe lobbying. I don't know what they supposedly spent all of the money on, but I didn't see any written receipts or anything of that nature either. So the money just, basically up and vanished, in other words. So I was like, okay, then I need to, you know, get what I was promised, which is that the terrain is sold and I get my money back. Now, the person, the notary that I mentioned, his name is Francisco. He works at his father's notary office. He's a notary himself. And he had started going to the place where I do gymnastics, so he had become like he's friends with many of my friends. And he was going to the place I would go daily as well. So there was a bit of a, very awkward situation where I considered him a friend at this point, but he also wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. Like, he was basically, my money had been taken, and I could not be sure if he's in cahoots with this other person, although I have to say they would be pretty good actors because, as I mentioned, there were multiple meetings, and he also seemed to be distressed and annoyed with everything that was going on, all of the delays, all of the excuses, all of the issues. But he basically promised me, like, okay, if I can sell this terrain, then I'll give you your part. So instead of immediately resorting to conflict, I first tried to help him find brokers to try and sell the terrain to someone. But with a terrain of this size, and it doesn't have an existing road, it's like overgrown by basically jungle, selva, and it's very hard to properly inspect it or really build a project if you first have to get an access to it. It could be subdivided, but then you first have to pay a bunch of taxes, and it just, it could be done, but it's a hassle, and it's difficult to find investors for this project. For the same reason, it's difficult to sell it. So he told me, like, okay, well, the only thing you can do is file a lawsuit. So I had filed a criminal lawsuit, because it's considered fraud, the way that the money, up and disappeared with no trace, and there's a lot of clues pointing to the fact that they, from the get-go, were planning all of this, and they have the modus operandi, I think it's called, where they have done apparently similar things, although I don't have all the details. But I think that he's basically a professional scam artist, this guy. And the criminal lawsuit at first seemed to go well. Well, actually, no. I at first hired a lawyer, like this lady lawyer who was just incompetent. Then I switched to another guy who had like a very small law firm, basically him and maybe one other guy, which might have also been a mistake. But he seemed to be very motivated and seemed to be very knowledgeable. I also got a good vibe from him when we talked. Unfortunately, maybe my vibe meter is not all that sometimes, because later he ended up having he told me he wanted to have an in-person discussion with Ricardo. And before that meeting that they had, the lawsuit was supposedly looking all right and things were moving ahead properly. I told him, like, okay, I would rather you don't meet with him unless you record the conversation. He ended up meeting with him anyway and didn't record anything, so I have no idea what was said there. But all I know is that afterward, he said that the lawsuit was basically, not a sure thing, or like even it was very unlikely for us to win. And he was also asking for more money, even though our contract stipulated that his next payment was supposed to be from the bono de éxito, like the success, upon success only. So I told him, like, I don't plan to pay more money. We had an agreement and everything was going to be covered under this agreement until such time that I receive funds from the sale of the terrain, or from, whatever penalty is applied to the sued party. And that was basically it. Like, he didn't follow up on the case, and it just, stayed dead in the water from there on out. I believe that he might have been bribed or something like that, because there's also the situation of the fact that Ricardo at some point told me that upon making the deal with Francisco, the notary, he had received a portion of the funds that I sent under the table, which of course was not disclosed to me. Like, I didn't know there was going to be some kind of kickback. Otherwise, I would have thought twice about getting into the whole deal. All of the funds were supposed to be meant for creating or like building the solar farm. I have to correct my previous statement. The incompetent lawyer was never on the criminal lawsuit. She was on the civil lawsuit. So that was the one that failed at first because she had used the wrong via legal, like the wrong method or the wrong channel to issue the lawsuit. But it was dismissed without, so I still had the possibility of suing through the proper channel. So of course I hired a more competent lawyer to do so. And he told me from the start, like, this might take 6 years, and it's, at least I had a good vibe from him, because he also mentioned that he wanted to do things properly and not, bribe people and get it thrown out. Because, it's sometimes difficult not to fall into these traps, because it seems like the easy solution sometimes, but like, morally speaking, I feel it's wrong when you take the easy way out and go with these, just go like, okay, everybody's bribing, I guess I'll also bribe, just to smooth things along. So that case is still in process. Like, initially the judge basically dismissed the case, said you have a certain amount of time to issue a lawsuit in Mexico, otherwise it's prescrito, or the time has expired, basically. And that was one of the arguments of the other parties, which the judge, who, I don't know, didn't, I hope that she wasn't, bribed, but it's confusing as to why she would have interpreted the law incorrectly. Anyway, that was overturned, and now there's like one more level that we have to go through in order to ensure that I have won, basically, the lawsuit, the civil one. So it's still ongoing, it's still in process. It's very long-winded, it's costly. I had considered, dropping it at some point, because it's a lot of energy and time that you have to invest. But if you do that, then you have the issue of the fact that when you lose the lawsuit, the other party can then sue you for, legal costs and damages. So I kind of, once I started it, I had to see it out to the end. So yeah, if you're interested in staying up to date with that, I'll surely publish more videos in the future. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. On to the next subject. Another reason that I decided to leave Mexico after living there for over a decade is the rampant prevalence of drugs. Especially, like, it's not such an issue for me, although it's a bit odd sometimes when you're, at a restaurant, for instance, in Tulum, and when you're walking in, they're already offering drugs. When you go to the toilet, they're already trying to shove it, almost in your nose, like, try this. It's more so for my son, who was close to becoming a teenager, and it's something that's difficult to not get into contact with if you're starting to go out or something, if you're out and about in Cancun, or even more so in Tulum. It's just everywhere. Even it even happened one time, as I was on a yacht with some friends. Like, a jet ski pulled up and just offered us, asked if we wanted to buy any drugs. So they have like service to to your boat, which is it's pretty crazy how advanced this is. I even recall when I went to Puebla that they had like a menu that was presented at some point with like all kinds of drugs, like printed out, and like they deliver the same day to your door. Yeah, it was striking just how commercialized it was, professional, pretty much. So, as you probably know, in Mexico, the fact that the cartels are connected to the drugs, that's connected to the violence, it's one big issue. It brings everything that brings in a lot of dollars and is illegal is going to proliferate the cartel's presence. And that's another occurrence, actually, now that I recall, of some violence happening in my proximity. I was once at a restaurant in Tulum with some friends, like a friend from the US. And this motorcycle, it wasn't even that late, it was like maybe, I don't know, 9 p.m. or something, maybe 10. And this motorcycle pulls up to the restaurant and shoots somebody just a table away from ours. So yeah, I had a close call a few times in Mexico when it comes to shootings. So yeah, keeping my son away from drugs and keeping him away from danger was a big motivating factor for me to pack up and leave. And it's such a difference now that I've experienced being in Dubai. Just the fact that you don't always have to be watching your back is such a valuable thing. In Dubai, for instance, I've once left my cell phone for 3 days at the gym. It was my backup phone, and I didn't notice for 3 days. And when I came back, it was still right there in the same spot that I'd left it. Whereas, in Cancun, you go salsa dancing or something, and you look away for a moment, and your camera's gone from if you leave it on the table for a moment or anything like that, you don't want to take your eyes off of your things. And that is supposedly that Cancun is still relatively safe as compared to some other places I've heard about, like Argentina and Venezuela. Violence and theft is much worse there. Or other cities in Mexico also. If you go to Juarez or Michoacan, it's a lot more dangerous there than it would be in Cancun, because the cartels obviously know that tourists are the ones that bring in the dollars from buying drugs and other illicit activities that might occur. So they don't want to risk putting too many tourists in danger so that they don't get a travel ban or travel warning. One more reason that I left, which is probably pretty niche to me. Let's say one of the reasons that I stayed in Cancun in the first place was because they had one of the largest and quite modern gymnastics facilities. And I found a group of people there that I really clicked with, that I had a lot of fun with training. And when I left, they had just sold off the gym to create development land to put like residential towers. I suppose it's worth a lot more that way. And we did switch to a new gym, but it wasn't the same in terms of, there were no decent trampolines. Everything was just a bit more limited in terms of space. The equipment was not anywhere near as good. The coach we had was amazing, though. That's one of the reasons I stayed as long as I did. The coach really made all the difference. But yeah, if I compare now to the options that are available in Cancun, where it's, there's no AC, there's a couple fans. We're training in like 30 plus degree weather in high humidity on old equipment. It's quite a difference as compared to in Dubai, where you have these state-of-the-art facilities. Something that I also found very difficult in Mexico that I never really got used to was the fact that people are generally very often late, or even that they don't show up to commitments that they make. In Europe, if you say you're going to be somewhere or you plan to attend something, then generally that's a promise. Whereas in Mexico, even when you tell people, you make plans for like a catamaran or something that has a specific time at which the boat's going to leave, you can be sure that someone's always going to make the boat wait for that person to arrive. It happens every single time. And this can even be true for less so, but still happens for professional commitments. It's not as common, but it's way more common than it would be in Europe for sure. Another reason that applies to me might not apply to everyone, but since I'm from Europe, from Belgium, and there's an 8 or 9 hour difference, time zone difference, as compared to Cancun. One reason for me to move to Dubai was to have a smaller time zone difference. It's 4 hours or so, I think, compared to 9 makes a huge difference when it comes to adjusting. And in general, I wanted to be closer to family, so I'm spending some of my time in Dubai and some of my time in Belgium throughout the year. It's a lot easier to do when you don't have to fly 9 hours. The time to Dubai is about 6 or 7 hours if you don't make a transfer. But the time zone difference is what makes the voyage to and from Mexico so difficult, because it takes a week or so, for me at least, to properly get adjusted to the new schedule. I'm very punctual. My internal clock is very hard to adjust, shall we say. Another reason that I left was in order not to have all of my eggs in one basket, figuratively speaking. I was seeing, how easy it is for something like a black swan event to happen, like say Russia invades Ukraine, or in Cancun the issue was like the cartel violence is always there, like simmering just under the surface. There were a few times when like violence surged somewhat, and they were like throwing grenades at police stations, or bodies or body parts were being found outside the city buried, or those types of things make you realize that if there's an election and stuff hits the fan, you don't want to be in a place where it's very difficult for you to pack up and move. If you're too anchored down in one place, it's going to be a very difficult decision to make that call. So I figured it's good to have a property somewhere else, or build some roots elsewhere, so that if anything goes wrong, you have a residence permit, you know how things work, you may have a property that you can go to. So for me, that was kind of a peace of mind, and to have a plan B in case things in Mexico would go sour, either through politics or say natural disaster. You always also have these hurricanes. I had lived in Cancun for about 10 years without any hurricanes, but you can have one. Like in 2005 they had Wilma, which lasted for several days and destroyed half of the city. The last year I was in Cancun, we had 2 hurricanes, and one tore off some solar panels that should have been removed. That's another thing. in Cancun to get any work done. There's a lot of shoddy workmanship and a lot of people that half-ass their jobs. It turned out that the anchors for my solar panels were not the right ones, and yeah, even though I had it evaluated to see if it could withstand the hurricane, the whole the whole installation all of a sudden started like it was half torn off and started banging on the roof over and over. And then some neighbor hadn't secured his table on his terrace, and that went flying into the gas tanks, and they hadn't shut the valves. So I could, as I went outside to see what was happening to my solar panels, I could smell gas all throughout the common areas of the building. So that was a sticky situation. And they were like CFA, like the power supply provider in the electric company in Cancun. Their transformers were blowing up all over the place. So it makes you realize, one natural disaster or, wrong person is elected, things can go south pretty quickly. And if you don't have a backup plan, then you may overstay your escape window. So that's it in a giant nutshell. Those are the main reasons I left Mexico. There's a few more. I described those in another video. I'll link it here, wherever, try and find it. And if you're interested in staying up to date with my current trials and tribulations, you could say, in Dubai as well as summers in Europe, feel free to follow me, subscribe. It's much appreciated. Like this video if you liked it, I guess. And yeah, hope if you have any comments, leave those below. See you next time. Thank you.